Hey, welcome back, my little jelly beans. I'm Teacher Jess, and welcome back to Jira Cafe. How you guys doing? Coffee? Hope you have yours. Coffee, tea, whatever else you usually have. And this was actually quite a cute cup. This is but first coffee was gifted to me by one of the parents of the school. I thought that was very. Many of my students already know, first let the teacher have a cup of coffee, then we come with whatever the problems are. In one of the tests that my students were writing about fair trade and all of that, and it was a case study looking at coffee. And Shem, it was so cute. The kid checked on my coffee cup to make sure it was spelled correctly because it was this one, the but first coffee. So they checked on my coffee cup to make sure that they were spelling the word coffee correctly. Glad I'm there to help. Okay. So what I wanted to do today was this is supposed to be more for my nines. Um, this term they are looking at development in terms of economic development and everything like that. So I thought we could do a session that looks over the majority of their work, and hopefully it might be helpful to anyone in grade 9 preparing for term 2 exams. Okay, well, let's get started. There we go. Okay, development. So development, when we think about development, we usually think in terms of economy, but that's not all that development is. Development is, it's very broad um, term. So we think of economy, we think of when we have a developed country, say it's a country that's usually very built up, it has a lot of industries, it has, oh, hello, welcome to Geo Cafe. Your first time here? Welcome. So when we talk about, hello, welcome back. So when we talk about development in geography, we usually think money. We usually think wealth and cities and big industries. But development also looks at the human side. So how are the people in the country doing? Does everyone have a job? Is there enough food? Does everyone have access to education or basic services? That also factors into development, as well as environmental stuff. So usually when we think of environment, we think of things like are we developing sustainably? Are we using renewable energy and green energy sources and that stuff? But it's also how prepared are we for that environment? So a lot of countries they experience droughts or they experience hurricanes or earthquakes, and these are normal phenomena for them. And how they oh, thank you so much for following. And how they prepare for these environmental impacts is also a reflection on their development. Yay, I'm so excited that you've joined the club. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into that. That's just the little intro and the little basics. So we're going to look at development indicators. We're going to look at factors that affect development and how they all interconnect. Okay, but there we go. The first and most important thing I want to cover is using the correct terminology. This is always the first thing that I do in my lessons is we do not use first world, second world, and third world in geography. And I know I've heard a lot of people say, oh no, it's like an old fashioned thing. No, it was never correct. It wasn't correct like back in the day. No, it's not right. So first, second, and third world does not reflect economic development. Never has. So just to show you, first, second, and third world relates to the Cold War. First world countries were countries that would align with the United States. And second world countries were aligned with the Soviet Union. Third world were the ones that were kind of just like floating around and didn't pick a side. So you can see that's a history thing. That's not a geography thing. So first, second, and third world never has and does not relate to economic development. Don't use those terms. Okay, so instead, we use LEDC and MEDC. More economically developed and less economically developed. There is a gray space in between. So, like South Africa is typically put into LEDC category, but it's not as LEDC as other countries are. We are industrializing. So there is this little gray space for like developing countries. They're starting to become industrialized. We're starting to step into the MEDC. Okay. I'm hoping that's making sense so far. You're gonna see as we go through it, there's no like clear cut, you're in this category or that one. It's a general term that we describe when we compare to. Okay, so development, we usually think of just economy, but it's not just that. We also need to look at people that live in the country and we need to look at the environment. So when we talk about the development of a country, you have to look holistically. You have to look at all of these factors. All of that contributes to the welfare of the people. Okay. So that is when we finally get to how we measure this development. We measure it by looking at indicators. So economic, environmental, or social indicators. Because this is just a intro to development, I'm not going to go into all of the different types of indicators. We're just going to use some examples. But what we are going to look at, I absolutely love this website, and I do suggest that you check it out if you're interested in this. It's Our World in Data. Our World in Data breaks up all of these things. So if we just go by topic, um, let's say we're interested in education. So how educated different countries are. You can go into education and maybe say literacy, and they give a whole bunch of different, thank you. They give a whole bunch of different maps that shows you all of this information about those. And if you're interested in a specific one, you click on it and see its trends over the time. They also do like more deeper analysis, so they compare these different things. I wonder if we can find an example. Uh, no, not really. This is all just like change in literacy rate over time. But in some graphs, they show you GDP change versus literacy, and then you can see how they influence. So that's also very interesting. Okay, but this is the site that I'm going to be using. I really like this site. And of course it has maps, which is right up my alley as a geographer. Okay. So I mentioned the term GDP. Maybe it sounds familiar, maybe it doesn't. Okay. Okay, so GDP is a economic data. Economic means that it's related to money and wealth. GDP looks at how productive a country was. So it literally means gross domestic product. And it's the value of what they have produced in a given year. That is very important. GDP is 1 year. So whatever someone says the GDP of the country is, that is the GDP that year. It resets each year. Okay, so your GDP will change as the economy develops. But GDP by itself is a bit of a useless value. We are more interested in GDP per capita. And what that means is that they take the GDP of the country and they divide it by the number of people in that country. So when I explain this to my classes, I usually take the example of, let's say the school is doing fundraiser and they're trying to, I don't know, sell tickets for a concert or something. And we'll say that the class that sells the most or brings in the most money for the fundraiser will get some type of a prize or a treat for the class. But then they'll usually say, oh, but that's not fair because the grade 8 class has so many more kids than we have. Obviously they're going to make more money because they've more students that are selling tickets. So that's when we say, okay, we're going to work it out divided by the number of kids. So the number of tickets per student. And then we decide who sells the most. That is what GDP per capita is. So it's the how productive a country is divided by how many people there are in that country that could be contributing. I hope that makes sense so far. Okay, same as well. Good. Okay, now we look at the social side. So the social side is looking at how are the people looked after. The social will usually look at the general population. So in this case, I've got a picture over here of the waiting list or the waiting room in a hospital. You can tell just by looking at this that there's very limited access to healthcare in this situation. You can see how many people are in that waiting room, and they're probably going to be waiting for hours. I can say I've been unfortunate enough to be in the waiting room of several hospitals, and it is excruciating when you feel like you have a emergency situation, but you're sitting there for hours on end thinking this is critical, but the resources are so limited that they get to you when they can. So in poorer countries, it is very common for healthcare or other services, other public services, so limited that it's difficult to have access. And I want to elaborate a little bit on access. So just because the service is there, just because it's available, doesn't always mean accessible. So very often it can be, can I afford this service? Do I have to wait for several hours, several days, several months to eventually get this? And then there's also the very physical. Can I get to the service? Can I get to the hospital? Are there roads? Is there public transport? Do I have the vehicle to get me from where I am to where I need to be? So, is there the basic industry of transport? So all of that speaks to access of services. Okay, and the way that we can evaluate that is by looking at social indicators. So I've included over here life expectancy and infant mortality rates. Life expectancy is the average age that someone is expected to reach. So usually I think it's calculated from like age of birth, more or less how long the typical person would live to. Then infant mortality is how many babies are, or that are born die before they are 1 year old. I want to clarify over here by live births. So this doesn't account for, let's say, miscarriages. This is a baby that was born or recorded as exist like alive with a birth certificate and all that. So a baby that was born and doesn't make it to 1 year. Sometimes the kids try to ask like, what if it's like a stillbirth or something? No, it's only when they are born. Okay. And then we have literacy. Literacy is a percentage. So it's a percentage of people that can read and write. But it's not just of the whole country, because sometimes the country consists of 5 year olds, and I can't blame them if their 5 year olds don't know how to write. Perfectly understandable. So they say it's above a certain age. I think that age is 15. We can go double check. But basically, how many people of everyone that's over 15 knows how to read? Okay, close this for a second. Um, Actually, let's do environmental and then we can go to our world and data. Okay, so these are just some examples of when we talk about environmental indicators. So in this context, we're looking at how well we use natural resources, how much pollution are we accountable for or responsible for. Pollution would be very common, especially when we talk about climate change. Definitely a big factor. Fish stocks. So this is an interesting one that we sometimes go into and look at overfishing. This, especially since fish and the ocean is a very international resource. How do we monitor that? Of course, renewable and non-renewable energy, and how we manage our water. Okay, water, especially in a country like South Africa that is so water sensitive, is a very valuable resource. So water is the backbone of our existence. As soon as we have a drought, we have all kinds of problems. We've got limited water means limited agriculture, limited food, and everything starts to fall. Okay. So now I want to go to our world and data. Yes. And I want to explore some of the indicators that we've mentioned. So let's start with economic. Where is it? Population, health, economic development. Yes. Economic growth. Let's try economic growth. If we don't find it, we can just like search it. Oh, here we go. GDP per capita, yay! Okay, let's open that up. No, I think. Okay, so this is GDP per capita from 2019. Obviously, not all of this information is going to be as up to date because they obviously need to get the information plotted, graph it. So it will be a few years behind. So since I'm in South Africa, we're going to start with South Africa. And as you can see, our GDP per capita has been growing. That's delightful. Okay, a little bit concerning that we've been dipping down since 2010. But I guess that makes sense. So if you hover your mouse over any one of these countries, you can see what the GDP is at the moment. So there we can see it's $12,536. Um, and let's check somewhere else. So let's check Algeria. Oh, that has fluctuated a lot. Yeah, you're right. It's gone down quite a bit. And I wonder how it's changed now in recent years. So this obviously only goes up to 2019. I would like to know how lockdown affected this. So this was pre-COVID. You can see that your more economically developed countries like your United States, $2,000. Remember, this is annually. That is significantly better than South Africa. Something that you would notice is that all of these are in dollars. The reason why it's all in dollars is because we're trying to look at it at the same, apples for apples, pays for pays. So everything is converted to dollars. It's all seen through this lens, so we can compare it easily. And I think China was actually a good example. Um, Duplicate this. See if we can find just GDP. So not per capita. I was sure that the map did exist. This is global, but try that anyway. Oh, here we go. That's the one. Oh, okay, so this is GDP, which means that it's the total for the country. It's not divided by the population. So if we take a look at the United States, let me make sure I got the right year. Yes, okay. 2019, United States was 20.6 trillion. And then I'm going to compare it to another dark blue one. China, that's 20.2 trillion. So both of them are about 20 trillion. It's quite close. But if we look over here, GDP per capita in the United States is 62,000, but in China, 15,000. That is how the population influences this. Because China has a higher population than the United States. So the more or less similar GDP divided by more people versus divided by fewer people shows us how the population contributes. Right. Curious to see about South Africa. Okay. So 734 billion. Oh, I always find it strange how South Africa is always average. They're kind of sitting in this middle zone over there. They're not great, but it's always better than the rest of the countries. So, like, South Africa is in this 10 to 20,000 bracket, but the rest of Africa is all below. I don't think, yeah, it's always sitting at the not great, but better than other countries. I mean, same thing that we can see over here. This is GDP. So their GDP is not very high, but higher than most countries in Africa. Okay, so that was economy. Now let's take a look at some human factors. So I mentioned life expectancy. So let's start there. Life expectancy. Oh, easy one. Okay. Oh, there we go. So we can see that the dark blue has the longest life expectancy and the light blue has some of the shortest. I'm glad to see that there is no one in the 45 to 50 group. Yikes. Okay, there, but 50 to 55. That sounds rough. I mean, that's when just as you're starting to enjoy life. Okay, so the highest category of life expectancy, 80 up, and we can see a lot of it is in Europe. That makes sense. We do have a lot of aging population in Europe. Um, Australia always the anomaly. We often talk about the north-south divide, how the northern hemisphere tends to be a lot more developed than the southern hemisphere. But then there's always Australia that's somehow in the southern hemisphere and is the exception. And let's see how this has changed. So let's take a look at South Africa. Um, so we start recording from 1950. And wow, your estimated expiration date was 43 years old. That sounds terrible. At least now it's gone up. It's gone up to 62 years old. A little bit better. Not great. Somewhat better. Okay. So this shows that there has been some development in Africa, thank goodness. It's probably also linked to the GDP. So as we develop economically, we have more disposable money, we have better jobs, we can get better healthcare, so services are provided, um, and of course then life expectancy. Let's take a look at find a different country. Not back. Map. Country Brazil. Let's see what's happened there. Okay, I'm a little bit skeptical about 1900s. 26.3. 62.3. I'm a little bit skeptical of 1900s because I don't know how good they were at recording these types of things. Um, Generally, as a rule, I don't look too closely before about 9 because I don't know how reliable they were at documenting. Like notice that there's these massive gaps. So it's a decade interval. So each one of these dots is when they recorded in. So 1910, 1920, so that's when the next lot of data came in. So I would only actually really trust from and change. Yeah, right. There we go. Difficult. There we go. Ah, that's a good question. That one always comes up. Why are people dying so young in South Africa? I don't think we can exclusively attribute it to this one thing, but very big factor is HIV and AIDS. Because it's so prevalent in South Africa, so many people are dying far too young. Fortunately, it's something that we have been very driven to increase awareness, reduce spread, reduce infection, and just treat much earlier. So we have seen this go down. We have seen less cases or less infections. And hopefully then that will bring up our life expectancy. But there seems to be a strong relationship. Like I say, that's not all that it is. There are other factors, but it seems to be one of the big factors. What we can also do here is add other countries. So we have Brazil in already, and I want to compare Brazil to, let's say, South Africa. And who else? It's happening in Madagascar. Yep, why not? And Mozambique and Canada. Sure. Okay, so I've selected a few more over there. And now we can actually compare the trends. So we can see all of them seem to have increased. I don't know what happened here. Wow, South Africa, that's embarrassing. This is the only country that dropped so significantly. Oh God. South Africa has a very interesting history. So usually our indicators take interesting history, embarrassing history. Okay, but we can see all of them have been increasing. South Africa had a little speed wobble first, but it's still going upwards. That's see. Wow, Canada all the way up to 82.7 years old. I think we should move there. Looks great. Although maybe it's a bit cold, so that's okay. Okay, Brazil 72.8. Which is interesting because I don't think Brazil is a very developed country. Let's look. Um, so I'm just comparing GDP here, GDP per capita. So if Brazil's GDP is 14,000 and South Africa's is 12,000, okay, so moderately better. But I wouldn't have expected such a big gap. And I do wonder what the reason for. Okay. So we've taken a look at life expectancy. Let's take a look at literacy. Literacy and education is always very interesting because it looks at so many different things. It looks at, okay, can people read and write? Yes, it's usually literacy. But on this side, we can also look at things like how common is it for a person to stay in school? How common is it for people to go for tertiary education, so go to university and college. Um, More or less, how many years of schooling do the people have? So we can look at so many different factors. Also, the ratio of boys to girls in school. Do all kids go to school, or is it usually just boys that go to school? Okay, so let's see education. Start with literacy. I probably should read all of that stuff that's typed up. I just like the maps, so I go straight for the maps. Ah, this looks fairly. Oh, this is scary graph. This looks fairly up to date. 2022. Obviously, it's missing dots. So where it's grayed out like that, or it's like white gaps, it's missing data. It doesn't have any info. So I think I'm rather going to go back a few years and see if I can find the most complete picture. Should be able to check it. Ah, here it is. 19? 8? That's a little too far back. And 17. Okay. That seems to be the most recent, relatively complete data. And we see that a lot of countries are in the 95 to 100% category. I'm very glad to see that. I wonder if there are any countries that are actually at 100%. So we have United States 99, Canada 99, Russia 99.7, Sweden 99. Oh, Norway. Am I surprised? Honestly, Norway always somehow fits into like the highest of all of these. They always somehow do the best. So Norway 100%. That is amazing. Are there any others? 99. Oh, Portugal looks relatively low on the spectrum. Uh, yeah, I think Norway's the anomaly. The one's 90. Okay, so let's see how low does it actually get. Wow, I didn't think that there would be anything in the 0 to 20 gap. Oh, 90%. That is bad. So, just for context, it's not 19% of the population. It's 19% of people that are over 15 years old. So if you look, I don't know if you can see it, this little subheading over here, the share of adults aged 15 and older. So specifically looking at anyone that's at least 15 years old, only 19% can read and write. Wow. You can also see there's like almost no data. So the last entry is 2020 and then 2015. That is rough. I'm interested to see years of schooling. So we can find that on here as well. I'll look that up and I'll see what is the average number of years that kids are in school for. And like what percentage of kids actually go to school in Nigeria. Okay, South Africa's not very good, unfortunately. I mean 87 as a percent sounds like a good percentage, but if we look on the broad scope of things, I would hope that all adults are right. And as we can see, they're not. There has been some increase, but I think we as a country can do a lot better to educate. What immediately comes to mind for me with these things is we think about reading and writing and education in terms of careers. But for me, when I think about being able to read, my brain defaults to reading medicine instructions. So can you read on the box it says one per day or don't exceed three a day? That these are warnings that you put on packaging for a reason. You know, store away from children. Little notes that people assume when they put onto packaging that a consumer or a user would be able to read. But if only 19% of the population, of the adult population, is probably buying products and using medicine and all of these things, are able to read what's on the packaging, that that is what comes to my mind when I see that 19. So let's take a look at Niger. So you mentioned that you want to see their death ages young active. Yeah, let's take a look at Niger's life expectancy. Ah, sorry, site was being difficult. 52 years. Yeah, almost not surprising. So low. It just makes me wonder how much of that could be addressed by addressing just yeah. Let's go see if we can find something. I specifically want to look at years in. I'm sure I saw something. Mm, global patient spending. I think that's look average years of schooling. Oh yes, yay! There is three, 3 years. That is the average number of years that. Wow. Okay, so the subheading, average years of formal education for individuals aged 15 to 64. So that is looking at the people who are literate. So if we said that 19% of the adult population read, of that same population, the average number of years that they spend in school is 3. Wow. That and look how much it's increased. Look how it's increased from the 1950s. This is, well, it seems like they're on a good upward trajectory, and I really hope that continues. Oh, okay. We've looked at economy, we've looked at the social indicators. I think let's look at environmental. Okay, we have health, energy, environment. Where should we go? Access, climate change, air pollution. I don't just want to look at generic environmental factors. I want to see if there's something that could say something about the country. So, oh, sanitation could be interesting because this reflects on the industry, so basic infrastructure, And it can also say something about the healthcare, access to safe water. Okay. Share of deaths attributed to unsafe sanitation. So we can definitely see the trend. We can definitely see that the higher population, air pollution, we can backtrack to air pollution. So we can definitely see that the countries that had the low economic indicators and the low literacy rate um, also seem to have poor sanitation, which means that they probably have unsafe water, so polluted environment. See if we can find, you mentioned air pollution. Let's take a look at that. Huh. So this is interesting. Share of deaths attributed to air pollution. Like, kind of curious about how, but I don't necessarily want that answered, if that makes sense. Oh, I didn't expect that to be so high in Africa, since Africa isn't exactly doesn't really have high levels of air pollution. Mm, hmm. I'm just trying to actually find air pollution, by itself. No, where we can look is null score. It's not going to be able to give us exact values or anything, but it can give us a general view. Okay, so here's null score if you're not already familiar with it. Here we go. Atmospheric chemistry. So this looks at the different chemicals in the atmosphere. And I think this one is carbon dioxide surface concentrate, monoxide, sulfur, nitrogen. Okay, let's just go with the carbon dioxide. I think that's a very familiar one. So in this context, the maroon kind of brown looking is low concentration, and the beige or blue looking is high concentration. So we can see that around the equator, or like around Central Africa, it's quite low. But if we go further north and further south, it increases a little bit. Over here as well. Again, this is because of the equator. So this is where your rainforests are, and they will filter out or photosynthesize, so they extract some of. And if we look to north at our developed countries, look at all of those tinges of green. See the green or this pale beige? This tusk, all the carbon dioxide. And here as well. Okay, so we can see that there's a lot of air pollutants towards the more developed countries. Close that so it doesn't mess with my stream. So that's why I kind of find I don't know where the map has gone now. Why I find it interesting that there were so many deaths in Africa that were linked to air pollution because they're not like very big culprits of that type of pollution. I can say that water pollution is something that we seem to be quite guilty of. It's impossible to actually find a source of water that doesn't look like this. These types of rivers are so common to see. And what's shocking is that we tend to see this where people live and where they use the water. So where you need your water supply, that is where it tends to be the okay. So the last thing that I want us to look at, and we will go back to our world in data one more time just to recap this, is HDI, Human Development Index. So HDI is a way of looking at how the people are doing. It's a way of looking at the social indicators. This is an indicator that's made up of three different indicators. So it's looking at health or life expectancy, so health. It's looking at education, specifically literacy rate, and it looks at GDP per capita. So it takes all three of these things and it combines them together to be one indicator. So if you have a country that has a high HDI, it means that they have a high GDP per capita and a high literacy rate and a high life expectancy. So people tend to earn well, they are educated, and they have decent healthcare and can live long, happy lives. Okay, so that's the last one that I want us to look at. HDI. Human Development Index. Okay, so here we can get an overview. What I like about HDI is that it includes economic indicators as well. So it includes GDP per capita. So we can see, as we expected, the more developed countries, the MEDCs, have a higher HDI, and the LEDCs, the less developed countries, have a lower HDI. Now, high and low is rated on a scale of 0 and 1. So 0 being the lowest and 1 the highest. In this case, I don't think there's any country that has 1. Look. Yeah, Norway is usually the go-to. If you want to find the top end of the spectrum, just go to Norway. 0.966, that's good. 0.93, 0.92, 0.94, 0.67. Okay. Everything in the 0.9. But I don't see anything that has 1. That's to be expected. Okay, South Africa, have to know. 0.7. That's not too bad. You see, not too bad is like the adjective of South Africa. You pick another country, like the DRC, 0.48. That's, since Niger was our case study earlier, 0.39. That makes sense because one of the indicators is education, it's literacy rate. And they were definitely not doing very well in the literacy. China 0.7. Brazil 0.7. Ah, that's interesting since China had such a high GDP per capita. Don't know if I still have that open. Go back and check. GDP per capita. Oh, is this is more recent. That one. 17,000, 14,000. Okay, they seem to be in a similar bracket. No, I thought China's was fairly higher than Brazil. Okay, am I? So what I do like about HDI is that it includes multiple different things. It doesn't just look at the money and the income of the country. It also looks at how the people are doing, hence the name human development. So if we are wanting to get an estimate of how well off a country is, we shouldn't just look at their GDP or even their GDP per capita. We should look at HDI because it does give us a more broad scope view of how that country is developing. And once again, we can see that development is happening positively over time. That's good for you, South Africa. We're trying. Let's take a look at Belgium. Well, wow, has always been very high. Let's add a few others. Uh, Austria, Gasca, Mexico, Canada, Peru, and Greece. There we go. Oh, I don't think we have many LEDC. See if you can find a LEDC. I think India counts. There might be one of those. Kenya? Okay, I think we have enough. Ah, Madagascar's data only starts from 1999. Okay, so if we take a look, Belgium is the highest from our current group, but it seems like it was Canada at one point. Don't know if you can kind of see it, but over here, Burundi. Okay, let me add Burundi. Uh, Burundi, there we go. Ooh, oh, we have a new low. Oh, wow, that's very low. Burundi, what you up to? Okay, so if we take a look at Canada and Belgium, if I hover the mouse over it, you can see the exact values. You can see that Canada was in the lead at one point, and then somewhere around, where is it? Where does it switch? Come on. That is close. There we go. 2010. Belgium took over, and then they became, I'm not saying like the highest, just the highest in our little selection. It's a nice thing to be competing on. So Burundi is always just at the bottom. India has been developing nicely. You can see it was fairly low over here, but that's come a bit. Peru has been increasing. It's good to see that everything is developing positive. So even if it's slow, like Madagascar, not much of a change, but it is developing. So that's positive. Okay. I think we can call that there. So I think that was a good introduction to looking at development. There's still so much more that we can go into. So, factors that affect development and how these different indicators influence each other. So, how education influences healthcare and vice versa as well. So, there's a lot to go into. It's a world of interest, and I do recommend checking out our world of data if you're interested in this type of stuff. Uh, Otherwise, are there any questions from your side? Cheers. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining. I hope that you learned something new, that maybe you had a few questions answered, maybe you learned something interesting, and hopefully I'll see you guys next week again. Okay. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye.